this week's episode of the Dragon Press, the news that wowed down. This week we're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution and its effects on modern day society. Although the Industrial Revolution had many positive effects, like a better education system and many technological advancements, it also had many negative effects, such as child labor, which led to great amounts of death, disease, and terrible injury. The Industrial Revolution resulted in many new inventions that changed the world as we know it and inspired the technology that we use today. The first invention we're going to talk about is the photographic camera, invented by Joseph Nicephore Nicephore. Nowadays, we can take a picture with a click of our phone. It wasn't always like that. The camera captured the world around them perfectly, so artists found it useless to recreate it with a paintbrush. They began to paint more symbolic pieces of art and steered away from the topic of realism. This resulted in the movement of Impressionism, which changed the way art was created and perceived. Not only did the camera affect the world of art, it also made the film industry possible. First came the photo. Then, silent movies with text and dramatic music. After that, the action-packed movies we now know today, with crazy effects and shots. Victory! Without the first photograph, none of this would have ever been possible. The second invention we're going to be talking about today, and arguably the most influential of the Industrial Revolution, was the steam engine. Choo-choo! The first variation of the steam engine was created by Thomas Newcomen in 1712. Approximately half a century later, James Watt created a variation of it, Watt's version being much more practical. This new and improved model was made so by removing the spent steam to a new vessel, where it would collect condensation. This therefore accelerated the entire process and made it so you could get more for less fuel. The Industrial Revolution was a time for growth and change. A variety of inventions were designed during this time period that propelled the field of science exponentially.
Without these revolutionary creations during this period in time, who knows where science would be nowadays?
Period.
While we're at school, let's talk about education during this time in the 1800s. Before the Industrial Revolution, most families made a living by working on farms. From a young age, people were taught how to shear sheep and plant seeds, but as urbanization commenced, these skills became less useful. As more and more people began to live in a city environment, there was the option of more professions to choose from. This meant that basic education skills such as reading and writing became more important. The government began to notice this change in society and realized how important education was. At the time, only the richest of the rich had been able to send their children to school.
We're rich and we're going to school.
People of middle and lower classes were forced to try to learn to read by using sticks and dirt on the ground. In 1880, a law was passed making it required for all children between the ages of 5 to 10 to get at least the basic educational skills. Even children from the poorest of families were able to attend school as it was provided by the government, some of the first ever examples of public school. Even though education was available, many families still couldn't afford to send their children to school since it meant children spent less time in the factories to help make money for the family. But as the years went by, more and more kids were able to get a healthy education regardless of social class. In the 1890s, further acts were passed allowing kids with disabilities to get special academic help. Despite the many negative effects that came with the Industrial Revolution, education was a positive and helped create some of the systems that we still use today.
While the new inventions and education systems created during this time period were very important and beneficial,
there were many things that weren't all that great, and a fairly big example of this is child labor.
During urbanization, more and more factories began to pop up, and the farming culture was replaced by a manufacturing one.
Manufacturing meant working in factories and coal mines, jobs that were much more dangerous and dirty compared to farm work. The children who were put to work in these factories didn't have a choice, and the factory owners knew it.
In order for the kids to support their families, working in a factory was inescapable.
People would spend days at a time stuck in the stuffy and polluted buildings, churning through different assignments to keep the factories running.
Machines use heavy amounts of coal, causing thick smoke to coat the air and fill the workers' lungs.
Many people lost limbs or even lives from working with such close contact to these deadly machines. Diseases spread like wildfires, and the longevity of life became worse and worse.
But as the factories continue to grow, more and more people are needed to power them, which meant each worker's salary was on a constant decline. Even with how horrible the work already was, children specifically were paid 10 to 20% of a man's salary, as they had no rights compared to adults, yet had to work the same or even longer hours. During this time period, the average age of death for children who had worked in factories was below 25 years, due to all the deadly chemicals they were exposed to with regularity.
This is just one of the many examples of the horrors throughout the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a period of transition.
A time in history where things were evolving, for the better and the worse.
While revolutionary inventions were created and education was starting to become more widespread and accessible, children's lives were being ruined in the factories they were forced to work.
Although this period definitely has its pros and cons, it is inarguable that things that came from it changed the world forever as we know it. Thanks for watching this week's episode of the Dragon Press.
We hope you got wowed by the news from our dad.